Okay, quick deal before we start. You get the story, I get the like and subscribe. Everybody wins. Now buckle up. This one is wild. Imagine spending decades chasing a ghost. A ghost made of legends, imprecise maps, and stories told by drunken sailors in 18th century taverns. Imagine defying governments, historians, rival treasure hunters, and even modern science, all for an impossible dream: to discover the most famous lost pirate ship in the sea.
This is the story of Barry Clifford, the man who faced the skepticism of the entire world and won. The man who found the Whydah Galley, the only scientifically authenticated pirate ship in history. A man who wasn't just searching for gold, but trying to prove that legends were real.
April 26, 1717. A monstrous storm sweeps across the coast of Cape Cod. Winds of 110 kilometers per hour. Waves 9 meters high. In the midst of chaos, a ship loaded with the greatest pirate fortune ever assembled collides with treacherous sandbars. Within minutes, the Whydah Galley, a floating fortress with 102 cannons and 4.5 tons of treasure, sinks into the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. With it, 144 men disappear into the depths. For 267 years, the richest ship of the golden age of piracy remained lost, buried, forgotten, considered impossible to find. Until an 8-year-old boy, listening to stories beside a bonfire in Cape Cod, made a promise. I'm going to find that ship. I'm going to prove the story is real. It would take 15 years, mortgaging his house, risking his life, facing courts and skeptics. But Barry Clifford was determined, because for him, this wasn't just about a shipwreck. It was the most tragic love story of the golden age of piracy, and he needed to bring it to the surface.
The boy who grew up among ghosts. Barry Clifford was born in 1945 in Wellfleet, Massachusetts, a small village in Cape Cod where the ocean isn't just landscape, it's living memory, it's cemetery, it's legend. Cape Cod is one of the most treacherous stretches of coast in North America. Since the 17th century, more than 3,000 ships have wrecked in its shallow waters and shifting sandbars. The residents of Wellfleet grow up hearing stories of ghost ships, cursed treasures, and crews that never came home. For most children, they were just bedtime tales. For Barry Clifford, they were mysteries waiting to be solved. Barry's uncle, Bill, was a lobster fisherman, a man of few words, skin weathered by salt, and hands calloused from 40 years at sea. Bill knew every reef, every sandbar, every treacherous current of that coastline. And he knew the stories, all of them. But there was one he told more often, one that made his eyes shine even decades later. The story of the richest pirate who ever lived, and the woman who waited for him until she died.
Samuel Black Sam Bellamy arrived in Cape Cod in 1715 at age 27. He wasn't a pirate yet. He was just a young English sailor without money, without a future, trying his luck in the American colonies. It was in a tavern in Eastham that he first saw Maria Hallett. She was 15 years old, daughter of a landowning family. Dark hair, eyes that, according to local legends, seemed to hold secrets of the sea. Bellamy fell in love instantly. And surprisingly, Maria did too. For months, they met in secret, on the beach, under the stars, away from the judging eyes of Cape Cod's puritanical society. But when Maria's father discovered the romance, his reaction was brutal. A vagrant sailor is not worthy of my daughter. Get out of here and never come back." Bellamy was expelled from town, humiliated, destroyed. But before leaving, he made a promise to Maria. "I'll come back, and when I return, I'll be the richest man you've ever seen. I'll prove I'm worthy of you." Bellamy left for the Caribbean in 1716. He joined a treasure-hunting expedition led by Captain Benjamin Hornigold, searching for a legendary Spanish galleon sunk in Florida waters. They never found the galleon, but Bellamy found something more valuable: pirate life. Within a year, Samuel Bellamy became captain of his own pirate fleet, and he wasn't a common pirate. Bellamy had a code, a philosophy. He told his crew, "Kings and governors call us thieves and murderers, but we are free men. They steal under the disguise of laws. We steal openly, with honesty." His crew was different from any other. English, Africans, Native Americans, even some Mosquito Indians from Central America worked side by side. Bellamy didn't tolerate unnecessary torture. Ships that surrendered peacefully were treated with respect. And most importantly, he freed slaves whenever he captured slave ships. In an era when slavery was accepted even by pirates, Bellamy was revolutionary.
In February 1717, in the waters between Cuba and Jamaica, Bellamy spotted his greatest prize, the Whydah Galley, a British slave ship 30 meters long, built in London, returning from Jamaica, loaded with gold, silver, indigo, and ivory. Bellamy chased it for 3 days. Captain Lawrence Prince realized he had no chance against Bellamy's pirate fleet. He surrendered. And Bellamy, true to his word, didn't execute anyone. Instead, he gave Captain Prince one of his smaller ships so he could return home safely. Then Bellamy did something extraordinary. There were still some slaves aboard the Whydah, men who hadn't been sold in Jamaica. Bellamy freed them immediately and offered a choice. You can disembark at the next island free, or you can join my crew as free men, with the same rights and the same share of treasure as any other man here. Many chose to stay. The slave ship, symbol of humanity's worst, transformed into a symbol of pirate freedom.
In the following 2 months, Bellamy plundered more than 50 ships. Each capture added gold, silver, jewels, spices. When the Whydah was loaded with 4.5 tons of treasure, more wealth than most men would see in 1,000 lifetimes, Bellamy announced to the crew, "We're heading north to Cape Cod." Some crew members asked, "Why? We have everything. Why risk treacherous waters?" Bellamy smiled, "Because I made a promise." Meanwhile, in Cape Cod, Maria Hallett waited. She had given birth to Bellamy's child, a baby born months after his departure. According to fragmentary historical records, the child died in infancy. Puritan society condemned her, prostitute, witch, unwed mother. But Maria didn't care. She went to the beach every night, looked at the horizon, and waited. Bellamy had promised to return, and she believed.
April 26, 1717. Maria was on the beach at dusk. A storm was approaching, cold winds, sky darkening rapidly. And then, through the fog, she saw sails,
A large ship, the Whydah galley. Bellamy had returned, but the sea had other plans. The storm struck with apocalyptic fury, winds of 110 kilometers per hour, waves 9 meters high. The Whydah galley, heavy with treasure, couldn't maneuver. Bellamy fought at the helm. He could see the lights of Wellfleet, so close to Maria, so close to fulfilling his promise. And then, brutal impact. The ship collided with a sandbar, hull splitting, men screaming, waves breaking over the deck. Within minutes, the Whydah galley sank. Samuel Bellamy was 28 years old. He was less than 150 meters from Maria, but the ocean took him.
According to local legends, Maria saw the shipwreck, saw the sails collapse, heard the screams, and knew Bellamy would never reach her. She spent the next 50 years alone, shunned by society, called Sea Witch by cruel children, until the day she died, in 1767, at 67 years old. She went to the beach, looked at the horizon, and waited. Barry Clifford heard this story dozens of times, sitting by the fire, looking at the same ocean that had swallowed Bellamy. And each time he heard it, one question consumed him. What if the ship is still there, waiting to tell its story? At 8 years old, Barry made a silent promise. At 23, he began studying seriously. At 37, he was finally ready for the hunt. But between the promise and the discovery, there were 15 years of obsession ahead. If Barry Clifford wanted to find the Whydah, he first needed to understand the ship, its construction, its history, its final moments. And the more he researched, the more fascinating the story became.
The Whydah galley was built in 1715 in London shipyards, commissioned specifically for the slave trade. At 30 meters long and with 3 masts, it was classified as a galley, a fast, agile ship designed for long transatlantic voyages. Its name came from Whydah, a port on the West African coast in present-day Benin, which was one of the largest centers of the slave trade in the 18th century. The Whydah was designed to carry horror, capacity for 700 enslaved people in the holds, chains embedded in the walls, minimal ventilation, space only sufficient for people to lie down, unable to sit. On its first and only voyage as a slave ship, the Whydah transported approximately 500 enslaved Africans from Whydah to Jamaica. At least 100 died during the voyage. After selling the slaves in Jamaica, the Whydah loaded its reward: barrels of sugar and molasses, silver ingots, Spanish gold coins, African ivory, indigo, used to make blue dye, extremely valuable at the time. Captain Lawrence Prince was returning to London when he crossed paths with Bellamy's pirate fleet. It was February 18, 1717. The chase lasted 3 days. Bellamy had 3 ships, Prince had 1. When he finally surrendered, Prince expected to be executed. It was the common fate of captured captains. But Bellamy surprised everyone. According to accounts from one of the Whydah survivors, recorded in 1717 court documents, Bellamy gathered the captured crew and gave a speech. "You are slaves to rich men. You work until you die to enrich kings and merchants you'll never meet. We pirates are the only honest men in this world. We don't hide behind unjust laws. We take what we want openly, and we divide it equally among all." Bellamy offered the Whydah's crew the chance to join him. About 30 men accepted. Those who refused, including Captain Prince, were placed on a smaller ship and allowed to leave in peace. It was a strange code of honor, but it was a code. Bellamy transformed the Whydah into a floating fortress. He added 28 cannons to the original 18, totaling 46 major cannons and dozens of smaller pieces. He reinforced the hull, increased the crew to 146 men, and began the most successful sequence of raids in piracy history.
Between February and April 1717, Bellamy captured more than 50 ships. Each capture was added to the Whydah's treasure. Spanish coins of 8 reales, or pieces of 8, Portuguese gold, South American silver, jewels from wealthy merchants, weapons, supplies, and more volunteer crew members. According to modern estimates based on inventories of captured ships, the Whydah carried between 4.5 and 5 tons of treasure. In today's values, more than $120 million. It was the most valuable pirate fortune ever assembled. The last ship Bellamy captured was the Mary Ann, a small English merchant. It was April 26, 1717, morning. The Whydah was heading to Cape Cod. Bellamy could have let the Mary Ann pass. He already had enough wealth. But pirates are pirates. He captured the ship, added the last treasures to the Whydah, and continued north, toward Cape Cod, toward Maria Hallett. He didn't know he had less than 12 hours to live.
The storm began at dusk. Northeast winds, black sky, rising waves. The Whydah was a few kilometers off the coast of Wellfleet. Bellamy could see the town's lights. So close. But the Whydah was too heavy. 4.5 tons of treasure, 46 cannons, 146 men. The ship didn't respond quickly enough to maneuvers. At 11 p.m., the Whydah collided with a submerged sandbar. The impact was brutal. The main mast collapsed. The hull began to split. Waves 9 meters high broke over the deck. Men were thrown into the freezing sea. Within minutes, not hours, minutes, the Whydah galleys sank. 146 men were aboard. 144 died. Only 2 men survived. Thomas Davis, a Welsh carpenter who was forced to join the pirates, and John Julian, a Mosquito Indian from Central America, the ship's pilot. Davis was dragged to the beach, half dead. He was found the next morning by locals and immediately arrested. John Julian disappeared in the following weeks, probably enslaved or killed. Davis spent months in prison being interrogated about the location of the treasure. His testimony, recorded in court documents, would be crucial 267 years later.
The pirate hunter is born. Barry Clifford spent his adolescence obsessed with the Whydah story. But obsession doesn't find ships. He needed knowledge, training, skills, and above all, he needed to figure out where to look. At 18, Barry left Cape Cod to study maritime history at the University of Maine. Not to get a degree, he dropped out after 2 years, but to have access to historical archives, old maps, and specialized libraries. He spent hundreds of hours reading diaries of 18th century captains, shipwreck accounts, survivor testimonies, old colonial maps, and old nautical charts. But reading about the sea wasn't enough. He needed to know the sea. At 20, Barry became a certified commercial diver. He worked on oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico, participated in rescue operations of sunken ships, did underwater maintenance on port constructions. He learned to work in zero visibility, where you must rely only on touch. He learned not to panic when equipment fails at 30 meters depth. He learned to respect treacherous currents that can drag a man away in seconds. And most importantly, he learned that the ocean doesn't forgive mistakes.
In 1973, at age 28, Barry gained access to a document that would change everything. The interrogation of Thomas Davis, Widdaw survivor, conducted in 1717 by Boston colonial authorities. Davis had been forced to join the pirates. He was a carpenter, and Bellamy needed someone to repair the ship. When he survived the shipwreck, Davis was arrested and interrogated for weeks. The authorities wanted to know, where is the treasure? Where exactly did the ship sink? How many men were aboard? Who were the other pirates? Davis answered everything, and his testimony included a detailed description of the wreck site. The ship collided with a sandbar less than a quarter-mile from Wellfleet Beach, near Bound Brook Island. The storm was so violent we couldn't see the coast. Waves broke over the deck. Within minutes, the ship split apart. I was thrown into the sea and, by God's miracle, reached the beach. Barry read this testimony dozens of times. A quarter-mile from the beach, near Bound Brook Island. It was the most specific clue any treasure hunter had ever had about the Widdaw. But there was a huge problem.
Bound Brook Island no longer existed. In 267 years, the Cape Cod coast had changed dramatically. Storms created new islands, others disappeared completely. Sandbars moved kilometers. Coastal erosion transformed beaches into cliffs, and there were no reliable maps showing where Bound Brook Island was in 1717. Barry spent the next 5 years obsessed with a single question. Where was Bound Brook Island? He visited libraries in Boston, New York, London, compared colonial maps with modern nautical charts, studied coastal erosion patterns, talked to marine geologists, interviewed elderly fishermen who had known Cape Cod waters for decades, and finally, after crossing dozens of old maps with modern geological data, he found it. Bound Brook Island hadn't completely disappeared. It had transformed into a submerged sandbar, visible only during very low tide. And it was located about 1.5 kilometers north of where all other treasure hunters had been searching. Everyone was looking in the wrong place for 267 years. In 1977, at age 32, Barry was ready. But underwater exploration is expensive, very expensive. He needed a boat equipped for extended expeditions, magnetometers, equipment that detects buried metals, side-scan sonars, diving equipment for an entire team, fuel, salaries, insurance. Estimated cost, over $100,000, a fortune in 1977. Barry mortgaged his house in Cape Cod, sold his car, sold personal equipment, and began convincing skeptical investors to bet on an impossible dream.
His first major victory was convincing John Kennedy Jr., yes, the son of President JFK, to join as investor and team member. Kennedy was fascinated by maritime history and loved the idea of hunting a real pirate ship. Then came John Bayer, engineer specializing in magnetometers who agreed to work in exchange for a share of the profits, and Rob Reyes, veteran diver who knew every dangerous current of Cape Cod and had survived 3 shipwrecks. The team was formed, but nature wouldn't make it easy. The first expeditions, 1978 to 1982. In the summer of 1978, Barry and his team departed for the first time to Wellfleet waters, equipped with magnetometers, sonars, and lots of hope. But the Cape Cod Sea is brutal. Storms appear without warning. Currents change direction in minutes. Underwater visibility, often less than 30 centimeters. And the sandbars? The sandbars are the real enemy.
Cape Cod has some of the most dynamic sandbars in the world. They move constantly, sometimes meters per day. Storms can bury wreckage under 5 meters of sand in a single night, and then, months later, expose it again. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack, except the haystack was kilometers long, was underwater, and moved constantly. The years of failure. 1978. Nothing found. 1979, metal signals, but only modern debris, fishing boat anchors, trash. 1980, a storm destroyed half the equipment. 1981, investors started jumping ship. 1982, local press mocked, the pirate hunter who finds nothing. Barry's wife filed for divorce. She couldn't take the obsession anymore. Friends said, "Give up, Barry. The ship doesn't exist. It's just a legend." But Barry didn't give up. Because he had something no one else had. Absolute faith in his Uncle Bill's stories and an inexplicable certainty. The widow was there, waiting.
1983, the decisive year. In 1983, Barry was almost out of money. It was his last chance. He sold everything he still had of value, convinced one last investor to bet on the impossible dream, and bought new equipment, a state-of-the-art magnetometer, more sensitive than any other available. In July 1983, he returned to Wellfleet waters. This time, the magnetometer went crazy. July 5, 1983. A day Barry Clifford would never forget. The magnetometer, equipment that detects concentrations of buried metal, began emitting very strong signals. They weren't sporadic signals. It was a massive concentration of metal in a specific area. Barry looked at the screen, then at the team. Either it's the widow or it's modern junk. There's only one way to know. Rob Reyes was chosen for the first dive. Veteran of dozens of expeditions, Rob had survived 3 shipwrecks and knew every danger of those waters. But even he was nervous. Visibility was terrible, less than 30 centimeters, strong current, freezing water. Rob descended with a metal shovel and a portable detector. The sand was compacted like concrete. 267 years of ocean pressure had transformed it into a solid mass. Rob dug and dug and dug. Meters of sand. His arms were burning, air was running out, and then his fingers touched something. Something solid, cold, heavy. Metal.
When Rob emerged, the entire team was on deck waiting. No one breathed. Rob removed his regulator and shouted, "It's a cannon! A damn cast-iron cannon!" The team exploded in celebration. But Barry didn't celebrate. He knew finding an old cannon proved nothing. Cape Cod had over 3,000 shipwrecks. It could be any one of them. In the following days, the team worked in 12-hour shifts, diving, excavating, sifting through tons of sand, and artifacts began to appear. More cannons, 6 in total in the first weeks. Cannonballs of different calibers. Fragments of wood preserved by sand. Iron chains. Navigation tools. Copper nails used in 18th century ship construction. It was clearly a colonial period ship, but which one? On July 12th, a week after the first dive, Barry was personally excavating when his fingers touched something small and round. He brought it to the surface, cleaned the sand, and his heart stopped. A coin, not just any coin, a Spanish gold coin, an 8 escudo doubloon, minted in Lima, Peru in 1712. Exactly the type of coin Caribbean pirates would plunder from Spanish galleons.
In the following days, more coins emerged. Spanish silver coins, pieces of 8, Portuguese gold coins, African copper coins, even Ottoman Empire coins. It was an international treasure collection, exactly what you'd expect from a pirate who plundered dozens of different ships. But skeptics argued, this doesn't prove it's the Whydah. It could be any pirate ship. Barry knew they were right. He needed more. In August 1983, under pressure from investors, Barry made a mistake. He announced to the press that he had probably found the Whydah. The reaction was brutal. Historians laughed. Clifford found an old shipwreck with some coins. That doesn't mean anything. He wants to sell artifacts and is making up a story to increase their value. There's no scientific evidence. It's all speculation. Barry was furious, but he knew they were right. He needed incontestable proof. He needed something that identified the ship.
(1984) The Search for Proof. In the spring of 1984, Barry returned to the site with an expanded team. This time, he brought professional marine archaeologists to document everything scientifically. Each artifact was photographed, cataloged, mapped, and the excavation went deeper. Extraordinary artifacts. The 1984 finds were spectacular. Pirate pistols with English maker marks, swords and daggers, ship's kitchen utensils, smaller bells, not the main bell, fragments of preserved clothing, human bones, crew remains, and jewelry. Lots of jewelry. But the most important object was still to come. The gold bar. In June 1984, a diver named Charlie Burnham was excavating near what appeared to be the ship's cargo area. His fingers touched something rectangular, heavy. When he brought it to the surface, the team fell silent. It was a gold bar. It wasn't large, maybe 10 centimeters long, but it was marked. Barry immediately took the bar to a specialized laboratory. When they cleaned the corrosion, foundry symbols appeared, merchant marks, purity numbers. And when they compared them with historical cargo inventories of the Whydah galley, it was a perfect match. The marks matched exactly with records of gold loaded by the Whydah in 1716.
When Barry received the confirmation, he held the gold bar in his hands and cried. 15 years since he started this search, since he studied maritime history, since he became a diver, since he mortgaged his house, since he was ridiculed by historians. He finally had proof. But it wasn't enough. The world of archaeology is relentless. A gold bar with matching marks was strong evidence, but it wasn't definitive.
Skeptics argued, Bellamy plundered dozens of ships. This bar could have come from any of them and then been lost in another shipwreck. They wanted more. They wanted absolute proof. They wanted the ship's name. Barry made a decision. I'm going to find the ship's bell, and I'm going to silence these skeptics once and for all. Every colonial-era ship had a bell, and every bell was engraved with the vessel's name and year. It was the official signature, the ship's birth certificate. If Barry found the widest bell, there would be no more debate, no more skepticism. It would be incontestable proof.
But finding a bell in a debris field is like finding a specific coin in a desert. Shipwrecks spread over hundreds of meters. Currents move heavy objects kilometers away. Storms bury artifacts under layers and layers of sand. Barry knew this could take years. Or perhaps the bell didn't exist anymore. But he had to try. 1985, third year of intensive excavation. Barry and his team had already retrieved over 400 artifacts from the ocean floor, but academic historians still refused to officially certify this is the Witta Galley. Barry was obsessed with a single mission: finding the bell. The importance of the bell. In colonial navigation, a ship's bell had multiple functions. It marked crew shifts, alerted to dangers, communicated with other ships, and in case of shipwreck, it was often the last thing thrown into the sea as a distress signal. Most importantly, every bell was engraved with the vessel's full name and its year of construction. It was the ship's official signature. If Barry found the bell, the debate would end.
But a 50-kilogram bronze bell could be literally anywhere in a debris field. When the Witta broke apart in 1717, the ship's structure disintegrated. Ocean currents dragged wreckage. Storms buried objects under meters of sand. And 267 years of constant movement meant the bell could be 100 meters from the main hull, or more. Barry developed a methodical strategy. 1. Map the entire debris field with precision. 2. Use more sensitive magnetometers to detect bronze concentrations. 3. Systematically excavate each significant anomaly. 4. Don't give up. The team worked 6 days a week, 12-hour shifts, week after week, month after month. False alarms. In March 1985, they detected a large metal anomaly. Entire team mobilized, immediate excavation. It was a piece of anchor. In April, another anomaly. They excavated for 3 days. It was an iron cauldron. In May, another signal. They began excavating
The moment. And this time, something was different. The magnetometer signal was perfect for bronze, and the shape detected by sonar was round. Rob Reyes descended personally, began excavating. The sand was even more compacted here, practically stone. It took hours, but then his fingers touched something smooth, curved. He dug around it and saw an unmistakable shape. A bell, covered with 267 years of marine corrosion, encrusted with shells, corals, sediment, but it was a bell. When Rob signaled upward, the team knew. No one spoke, because everyone understood if that bell didn't have an inscription, or if it had another ship's name, years of work would have been in vain. The lifting. The bell was lifted with extreme care, safety cables, slow movement. When it emerged from the water, heavy and dark, Barry Clifford touched it for the first time. His hands trembled, but the corrosion was so thick that nothing was visible, no visible inscription, just corroded bronze covered with marine life. The bell was immediately transported to a specialized laboratory for marine artifact restoration in Boston. Conservators spent weeks carefully removing layers of corrosion. They couldn't use the aggressive methods. Any inscription would be delicate after 267 years in the ocean. Barry waited and waited and waited. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat properly. His entire life came down to one question: does the bell have the name?
One morning in June 1985, Barry's phone rang. It was the laboratory. "Barry, you need to come here now." The conservator's voice was strange, emotional. Barry drove from Cape Cod to Boston, 90 minutes, in record time. When he arrived at the laboratory, his entire team was already there. They had all received the same call.
The revelation. The bell was on a table, illuminated by bright lights. Clean, restored, dark bronze shining, and there, engraved on the surface, old letters. Barry approached, read aloud, voice trembling. "The Whydah Galley, 1716." Emotional explosion. Barry Clifford fell to his knees, cried like a child. The entire team exploded in celebration. Hugs, tears, shouts of joy. Because finally, they had proved it. The Whydah's bell. Samuel Bellamy's signature. Definitive proof. Incontestable. Scientific. Real. The historical impact. In August 1985, a press conference was held. Historians from Harvard, MIT, and the Smithsonian Institution examined the bell. They analyzed metallurgy, engraving style, type of bronze used. Everything matched perfectly with the time and place of the Whydah's construction. There was no more doubt. In September 1985, the Whydah Galley was officially recognized as the first, and to this day only, scientifically authenticated pirate ship in human history.
Because it was never about fame or recognition. It was about an 8-year-old boy who heard a story beside a bonfire and decided that legends were real and spent 15 years proving it. But the war didn't end. But Barry would soon discover, finding the Whydah was only half the battle. Keeping the right to it would be war. Finding the Whydah was Barry Clifford's dream, but keeping the right to it would become his nightmare. Because the moment the world learned of the discovery, the war began. The legal problem. Maritime laws are a labyrinth of conflicting jurisdictions and contradictory precedents. Who owns a ship that sank in 1717? The discoverer? The state? The federal government? Crew descendants? Indigenous nations? Within weeks, Barry faced multiple legal claims. The claims. The state of Massachusetts argued, "Shipwrecks in our territorial waters are historical property of the state. They belong to the people of Massachusetts." The U.S. federal government counter-argued, "Territorial waters are federal jurisdiction. The ship belongs to the American nation." The Wampanoag Nation, a Native American tribe, declared, "The shipwreck occurred on our ancestral lands. We have historical rights over everything in them, including the ocean floor." Marine salvage companies claimed, "Maritime salvage law exists. Whoever rescues abandoned wreckage has right to up to 90% of the value." Historians and academic archaeologists demanded historical artifacts must be preserved in public museums. Clifford has no right to sell anything. And there were still rival treasure hunters who alleged, "We were also looking for the Whydah. We have right to part of the find."
Barry's position. Barry was furious. In a 1985 CBS interview, he vented. "I spent 15 years of my life looking for this ship. I mortgaged my house. I risked my life in dangerous dives. I invested hundreds of thousands of dollars. When everyone said it was impossible, I believed. And now that I found it, everyone wants a piece?" But emotion doesn't win legal battles. Barry needed lawyers. Many lawyers. The legal fight began. The first lawsuit was filed by the state of Massachusetts in October 1985. They requested immediate transfer of all artifacts to state custody. Barry counterattacked with a team of lawyers specializing in maritime law. His argument was simple. Maritime salvage law. Whoever recovers abandoned wreckage has legal right over it. The Whydah was abandoned for 268 years. I recovered it. It's monin'. But the state responded, "Salvage law doesn't apply to historical archaeological sites. They're cultural heritage, not commercial property." The years in court. The case dragged on for 2 years. 1985, preliminary hearings. 1986, expert testimonies. Archaeologists against archaeologists. Lawyers against lawyers. 1987, appeals, counter-appeals. During this time, 1. Barry spent over $300,000 on legal fees. 2. He had to suspend expeditions. He couldn't remove more artifacts while the case wasn't resolved. 3. Hundreds of artifacts remained trapped in judicial storage, unable to be exhibited or sold. And 4. The press began turning against him. The hostile media. Headlines changed tone. 1985, treasure hunter finds legendary pirate ship. 1986, legal dispute over pirate treasure gets complicated. 1987, Clifford accused of commercializing history. The New York Times published a devastating editorial. Barry Clifford may have found the Whydah, but his motivations are clearly financial. He's treating an irreplaceable archaeological site like a personal gold mine.
Barry responded in an open letter. "If I only wanted money, I would have given up 10 years ago. I invested my life because I care about this story, but I need to pay bills. I need to fund more expeditions. I can't do that if the government simply confiscates everything I find." The historic decision. In March 1987, after 18 months of legal battle, federal judge David Mazzone made a historic decision. Barry Clifford had legal right over the Whydah artifacts, but with strict conditions. 1. Mandatory scientific documentation. Each artifact must be photographed, cataloged, and documented by certified archaeologists before any sale. 2. Priority preservation. Artifacts of exceptional historical importance, like the bell, cannot be sold. 3. Partial donation. A significant percentage of artifacts must be donated to public museums. 4. Academic access. Researchers must have access to artifacts for study. 5. Transparency. All sales must be reported and documented. Barry accepted all conditions because he never just wanted to sell gold. He wanted to tell Bellamy's story. But the war continued. Winning in federal court didn't silence critics. The academic archaeological community was divided. Hardliners maintained, "Clifford is a looter, period." Pragmatists acknowledged, "We don't like selling artifacts, but his current archaeological work is solid, and it brought important discoveries. Supporters defended. Clifford represents a new model, private funding with scientific rigor. It's the future of large-scale archaeology. The most brutal attack. In 1988, the Society for Historical Archaeology published a devastating report. Clifford's excavation techniques are inadequate. Artifacts are being removed without precise three-dimensional mapping. Contextual information is being permanently lost. Barry was devastated because there was truth there. In the early years, his techniques were amateurish. He wasn't a trained archaeologist, but he learned. Barry's response. In 1989, Barry made a radical decision. He hired some of the world's best marine archaeologists to work permanently with him. Dr. Christopher Hamilton, archaeologist from Boston University. Dr. Kenneth Kincor, historian specializing in piracy. A team of professional conservators. And he implemented rigorous scientific protocols. 3D mapping of each artifact before removal. Detailed underwater photography. Sediment analysis. Immediate preservation of organic materials. Publication of peer-reviewed scientific studies. Barry transformed his operation into a world-class archaeological expedition and began publishing results. Between 1990 and 1995, Barry's team published over 20 scientific articles about the Whydah, analysis of hull timbers, study of pirate armaments, research on 18th-century slave trade, forensic analysis of human remains, digital reconstruction of the ship. Slowly, the academic community began respecting his work. But some battles were still to come.
The second wave of lawsuits. In 1992, descendants of Samuel Bellamy, or people claiming to be, filed suit. The treasure belongs to the Bellamy family, its ancestral inheritance. The case was quickly dismissed. Impossible to prove lineage after 275 years. In 1994, the British government tried to claim the Whydah. It was a British ship. It was built in London. It belongs to the British Crown. Barry responded with irony. The ship was captured by pirates. Pirates don't recognize the Crown. Besides, it sank in American waters, and Britain lost those colonies in 1783. The case was archived. But all these battles took a toll. Barry spent years stressed, in debt, constantly under attack. His marriage ended in divorce. His wife couldn't handle the obsession. He developed ulcers. Hair began turning white at age 40. But he never gave up. Because now, it wasn't just about finding the ship. It was about protecting his discovery. It was about honoring Bellamy. It was about proving he did the right thing. In 1996, after 11 years of legal battles, all major claims were resolved. Barry maintained legal rights over the artifacts. He established the Whydah Pirate Museum for public exhibition. He donated significant artifacts to public institutions. He continued scientific archaeological expeditions. He had won. But scars would remain. Reflection. Years later, in a 2007 National Geographic interview, Barry reflected, "If I had known about the legal battles ahead, would I have still searched for the Whydah? Absolutely. But I would have hired lawyers before announcing the discovery." And with a tired smile, he added, "Finding the treasure was easy.
Convincing the world you deserve to keep it, that was the hard part.
Winning in courts didn't mean winning in university hallways. The academic archaeological community was deeply divided about Barry Clifford, and some of his fiercest critics wouldn't give up easily. The structural problem. To understand the controversy, you need to understand the world of underwater archaeology in the 1980s. Archaeology was dominated by universities and governments. Expeditions were funded by research grants, not private investors. The goal was pure knowledge, not profit. And then Barry Clifford appeared, a treasure hunter, without a PhD, without university affiliation, who found what professional archaeologists couldn't, and planned to sell some artifacts to fund more expeditions. For many academics, this was heresy. The fiercest critic, Dr. James Delgado, marine archaeologist from the National Park Service, was one of the most vocal critics. In a 1986 article for the Journal of Maritime Archaeology, he wrote, "Clifford represents everything wrong with commercial archaeology. Historic wrecks aren't gold mines, they're fragile archives of human information. Each artifact removed without proper context is information lost forever." Barry responded publicly, "Dr. Delgado, with all respect, where was your team when I was mortgaging my house? Where were the universities when I was risking my life diving? The Whydah was there for 268 years. If you wanted to find it, you had plenty of time."
The sale controversy. The most controversial point was the sale of artifacts. Between 1986 and 1992, Barry sold hundreds of coins and some smaller artifacts at auctions. Total amount raised, approximately $2 million. For Barry, it was essential. I need to fund more expeditions. I need to pay conservators, archaeologists, equipment. No university will give me money for this. For critics, it was desecration. He's selling history, turning irreplaceable artifacts into commodities. The public debate. In 1989, the Smithsonian Institution organized a public debate. Commercial archaeology versus academic archaeology, the Whydah case. Barry Clifford on one side, Dr. George Bass, legend of underwater archaeology, on the other. The audience? Over 500 people, including international press. The confrontation. Dr. Bass argued, "Archaeology isn't treasure hunting. Our duty is to preserve historical context. Each artifact has a story, where it was found, next to what, in what position. When you remove objects to sell, you destroy that story. Clifford may have found the Whydah, but at what cost?" Barry responded, "Dr. Bass, I agree with every word you said. Context is fundamental. That's why I now document everything meticulously. But here's the truth. If I hadn't found the Whydah, it would still be buried, forever, because no university, no government was looking. Want to know why? Because it's expensive, risky, and academically uncertain. You prefer to theorize about lost shipwrecks than actually search for them. I preferred to act."
Every chapter of history begins with a single action. Yours can begin with a like and a subscribe. Join us and step into the stories the world tried to forget.